We must remember that a myth is a living entity and exists within every person. You will get the true living form of the myth if you can see it as it spins away inside of yourself. The most rewarding mythological experience you can have is to see how it lives inside your own psychological structure. Robert Alex Johnson. Robert A. Johnson was a Jungian analyst and author born in Portland, Oregon in 1921. Johnson lived an interesting life, starting as a disciple of Jiddu Krishnamurti in California. Later, studying at the Carl Gustav Jung Institute in Zurich, working under Jung's wife, Emma. Soon after, Johnson went on to establish his own psychotherapy practice, and then subsequently joined the Episcopal Church, where he studied for 4 years. He eventually returned to California to write and lecture about psychological interpretations of ancient mythology. His famous book, Understanding Masculine Psychology, later became a bestseller. Towards the last leg of Johnson's life, he also studied at the Sri Aurobindo Ashram, eventually dying in September of 2018 at the age of 97. His profoundly insightful book, Understanding Masculine Psychology, charts the development of the masculine part of the psyche onto the old myth of Parsifal. The story of Parsival is part of the medieval legend of King Arthur and the quest for the Holy Grail. The Grail myth dates back to at least the 12th century in Europe and was transmitted in various versions including French, English, and German. The latter being Wolfram von Eschenbach's version, which became the basis for Richard Wagner's Parsival opera and many others. The Grail myth speaks directly to our psyche, and in particular, as Robert A. Johnson notes in his seminal work, to the development of the psychology of the masculine in both men and women. And it's as relevant now as it has ever been. The myth surrounds the wounded Fisher King, Amfortas, the king of the Grail castle. He is in agonizing pain, and the kingdom suffers as a result. The Fisher King wound, in psychological terms, is a common condition for Western man, where every young man, as Johnson notes, has naively blundered into something that is far too big for him. He proceeds halfway through his masculine development, and then drops it as being too hot. Often, a certain bitterness arises because, like the Fisher King, he can neither live with the new consciousness he has touched, nor can he entirely drop it. This wound, however, is crucial for the development of consciousness, for its redemption, through the intercession of Parsival, is what leads to the complete integration of the self. It is what leads to a life of self-awareness, contentment, passion, authenticity. The court jester explains that the Fisher King could only be healed through the actions of an innocent fool, who would spontaneously need to ask a specific question. As Johnson again so eloquently explains, a man must consent to look to a foolish, innocent, adolescent part of himself for his cure. The inner fool is the only one who can touch the Fisher King wound. Parsival's story. Parsival, a name which means pure fool, an innocent young man raised by his overly protective mother in poverty, knowing nothing of his dead father, who himself was a knight, without any direction or schooling. He is dazzled one day by the appearance of a group of knights who visit his village and, to his mother's dismay, decides with all the conviction of youth to seek them out and become a knight himself. She agrees to let him go, but gives him a homespun garment that he chooses to wear for much of his life. This garment, Johnson notes, represents the mother complex in psychology, and will prove costly to Parsival in his development. Parsival finds and enters Arthur's court, but is initially ridiculed and expelled. However, legend held that a damsel in Arthur's court, who had not smiled for years, would burst into laughter at the sight of the greatest knight, which she did at the sight of innocent Parsival. The court immediately held Parsival in high regard, and Arthur knighted him on the spot. Parsival, naive and not burdened with fear or anxiety, seeks out the most fearsome knight of all, the Red Knight, a warrior so fierce he has never been defeated. Parsival, in his earnest naivety, confronts him and asks him for his horse and armor. Laughing, he agrees, but only if Parsival can take it from him. Predictably, Parsival is knocked to the ground by the powerful knight, but, as he falls, Parsival throws his dagger into the Red Knight's eye, killing him. This victory, as Robert Johnson surmises, represents the integration of the shadow side of masculinity, the negative, potentially destructive power. He must not repress his aggressiveness, since he needs the masculine power of his Red Knight, Shadow, to make his way through the mature world. The newly empowered knight goes out seeking battle and adventure, rescuing maidens and defeating opponents, but not killing them. Any knight Parsival overcame, he instead instructed to join Arthur's court and swear allegiance to him. The first encounter with the Fisher King. One day, along his heroic quest, Parsival sought lodging, but was told there was no place to stay for miles. He then encounters a man fishing in a boat on a lake, and asks if he knows of any place he could stay for the night. The fisherman, the Fisher King, tells him to go down the road a little bit and go left. Parsival obliges, and suddenly finds himself on the grounds of the Grail Castle. Windows gleaming, knights and ladies greeting him, the splendor of which he had never dreamed of in his life. A great ceremony was about to begin, one which occurred every evening. A great feast and celebration was held, where maidens brought out to all assembled the Holy Grail, from which all would partake, immediately granting them whatever they desired. Everyone, that is, except for the Fisher King. Because of his agonizing wound, he was unable to drink from the Grail, and his affliction continued to wreak havoc across the kingdom. During his quest, Parsival had encountered a mentor, the wise old man archetype, Gornemond, who had instructed him in the ways of knighthood. When encountering the Holy Grail, Gornemond instructed Parsival to ask an important question: whom does the Grail serve? This was the question that would heal the Grail King's wound. However, his mother had also told him not to ask too many questions, and hers was the advice Parsival heeded this time in the Great Hall. All assembled knew the prophecy that one day an innocent fool would enter the castle and ask the question that would heal the king, all except Parsival, and very quickly the ceremony ended, with everyone retiring for the night. The next morning, Parsival rides out, and the great castle disappears. The Wasteland. This loss of the Grail Castle tormented Parsival, and it would take years of grueling, rigorous battles and quests before Parsival realized that the homespun garment that he wore beneath his armor, the psychological symbol of the Mother Complex, had to be removed before he could partake of the Grail and heal the Fisher King. Parsival spends some 20 years earning his way back to the Grail Castle. They are difficult years, however, and he grows in bitterness and disillusionment. These represent the difficult years of middle age, where one begins to question one's very existence and the choices made. After 20 years of searching in vain for what was lost in the first encounter at the Grail Castle, Parsival has had his arrogance and pride beaten and humbled. One day, along his latest quest, he is introduced to a forest hermit. At first, the hermit scolds him for his failures, especially for not asking the question when he first encountered the Fisher King. However, he soon softens, sympathizing with Parsival, and then invites him to go down the road a little bit and go left. Returning to the Grail Castle. Again, Parsival suddenly finds himself on the grounds of the Grail Castle. This time, however, with 20 long years of earned experience and humility. Again, he finds himself in the midst of the great feast and celebration where maidens brought out the Holy Grail for all to partake. This time, however, Parsival asks the question, whom does the Grail serve? The simple act of asking the question immediately heals the Grail King, and the entire castle erupts in celebration. What is the answer to the question? You, my lord, the Grail King. And what exactly does this answer mean? Very simply, we serve something far greater than ourselves. Carl Jung, the greatest psychologist, would say that by asking this question, one comes to the realization that the ego now comes into service of the self. The goal of life is not merely to attain personal happiness, rather it is to serve the Grail, that is, to live a life not of ego, but of our most authentic nature, our souls, as Robert Johnson so eloquently sums up. One cannot pursue happiness. If he does, he obscures it. If he will proceed with the human task of life, the relocation of the center of gravity of the personality to something greater outside itself, happiness will be the outcome.